If you want to live, hold me, pleaded the rancher to the Apache woman on the ice. The morning air was crisp, biting at the rancher's face as he stepped out of his small cabin. The sky was pale, the sun just beginning to cast a soft gold across the snow-covered plains. The wind whispered through the bare trees, carrying the distant sound of a river moving under ice. He pulled his coat tighter, feeling the weight of the cold, but also the quiet beauty of the winter landscape. Life on the ranch was never easy, especially in these harsh months. But he had grown used to it. He knew the land, he knew the animals, and he knew how to survive. Today, however, something felt different. Perhaps it was the stillness of the river, the unusual quiet that pressed against his ears. Or maybe it was just that certain instinct inside him, a feeling that something important was about to happen. He shook off the thought and mounted his horse, moving toward the river's edge where the snow had not yet been broken by many footprints. The river stretched like a silver ribbon through the forest, its surface mostly frozen but not entirely. He knew the ice could be treacherous, hiding weak spots under the beautiful crystalline surface. As he approached, he noticed something unusual, a small figure near the far bank. She was an Apache woman, moving carefully, her steps tentative. She carried herself with a quiet strength, as if she had walked these lands many times before. Yet even with her experience, the river was dangerous. He watched her for a moment, squinting against the glare of the sun on the snow. She seemed unaware of the ice's weakness, or perhaps she simply trusted herself too much. His heart tightened. He had seen ice like this before break without warning, swallowing everything in its path. Without thinking, he urged his horse forward, urging himself to act quickly. As he drew closer, the woman stepped onto a patch of ice that looked solid but shivered faintly under her weight. A crack ran silently beneath her boots, invisible from a distance. The rancher's stomach dropped. He slowed his horse, calling out her name, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. His mind raced. Should he cross the river to reach her? Was it safe? The wind bit his face harder, and he realized that hesitation could cost a life. She paused, sensing something was wrong. Her dark eyes scanned the river, but it was already too late. The ice groaned beneath her weight, and a jagged crack split across the surface. She froze, fear flashing in her expression. Her arms went out instinctively, balancing, but the ice was failing. He could see it now, the thin, fragile ice bending under her feet, water peeking through the cracks. Without a second thought, the rancher dismounted and dropped to the snow, crawling toward the edge of the ice. He had done rescues before, but never like this, never with someone's life hanging by a fragile sheet of ice. Every inch forward was measured, careful, his hands digging into the snow to avoid slipping. He could feel the cold seeping into his clothes, but it did not matter. Nothing mattered except her safety. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice carrying across the wind. But she was frozen in place, staring at the widening cracks. He could see the panic in her eyes now. Time was running out. The current under the ice moved faster than it appeared, pulling at the broken pieces, threatening to drag her into the cold depths. He reached the edge of the ice, his heart hammering. The woman looked at him, her eyes wide, her breath forming clouds in the icy air. She was strong, courageous, but fear had taken hold. The rancher knew he had to act carefully. One wrong move and both of them could end up in the freezing water. He placed one hand firmly on the ice, testing it. It held for now. He inched forward, slow and steady, until he was close enough to reach her. "Move toward me, slowly," he instructed, his voice calm but urgent. "I've got you." He extended his hand, steady and firm. She hesitated, fear keeping her rooted to the spot. The ice around her was unstable. Every second it groaned and cracked. He could see the sweat forming on her brow, even in the cold. Her hands trembled slightly, but there was also a flicker of determination. She had survived harsh winters before, and she would survive this too. But she needed him. He edged closer, slowly lowering himself onto the ice to reduce his weight. Every movement was a calculation. The ice hissed under him, a warning he could not ignore. His mind raced with options. Could he reach her safely? Could he pull her back without breaking through? He adjusted his position, keeping his weight spread, and called out again, "Take my hand. Trust me." The wind carried his words, and finally, she nodded. Slowly, carefully, she reached out. Their hands met, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. He could feel her grip tighten, a mix of fear and hope, and he returned it with strength. "I've got you," he said, repeating it like a mantra, grounding both of them. The ice beneath them protested, cracks snaking outward like lightning across a dark sky. He inched backward, pulling her toward the shore, piece by piece. She followed his lead, placing her steps carefully, trusting him completely. The river, cold and relentless, seemed to conspire against them, but neither let go. Each movement was slow, deliberate, a dance of survival. As they moved, he kept talking, his voice steady, calming her fear. "Almost there. One step at a time. You're doing great. Just a little further." His words were simple, but they carried power. Reassurance that she was not alone. She focused on him, on his hand, on his presence. Slowly, inch by inch, they made progress. He glanced at the water below, seeing how close they were to disaster. His mind replayed all the lessons he had learned on the ranch: patience, caution, respect for nature. Now those lessons were saving a life. The woman, sensing his control and experience, began to relax slightly, her movements becoming more confident. She trusted him fully, and that trust was the only thing keeping them both safe. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the firmer snow at the riverbank. The rancher pulled her onto solid ground, his strength steadying her. She collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily, her hands pressed against the snow for support. He knelt beside her, checking her carefully, making sure she was unharmed. The relief washed over him, mingling with the adrenaline still thrumming in his veins. They sat together for a moment, catching their breath, the icy river silent once again behind them. The woman looked at him, her dark eyes filled with gratitude and awe. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. He shook his head, smiling softly. "No need. Just glad you're safe." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the forest and the faint promise of warmth from the rising sun. He helped her to her feet, brushing snow from her coat. They exchanged a look, one that spoke of respect and a shared understanding. The river had been dangerous, unforgiving, but they had faced it together. Trust, courage, and quick thinking had carried them through. As they began to walk back toward the trail that would lead them home, the rancher thought about the fragility of life, how quickly it could change in an instant. The woman walked beside him, silent but strong, a quiet hero in her own right. And though the river lay calm now, the memory of the cracking ice and the desperate grip of hands would stay with them forever, a reminder of a morning when courage and trust had saved a life. The snow crunched under their boots, the cold air stinging their cheeks, but the warmth of survival and human connection lingered. It was a day neither would forget, a story to tell, a bond formed in the quiet struggle of life against nature's unforgiving edge. The morning had started quietly, but the moment by the river had changed everything. The rancher could still feel the cold creeping into his bones, even though they were now on solid ground. The woman beside him shivered, not only from the chill but from the shock of what had just happened. Her breaths came in sharp, uneven gasps, and he realized how close they had come to disaster. The memory of the ice cracking beneath her feet made his stomach tighten. He moved closer to her, careful not to overwhelm but instinctively protective. "You're safe now," he said gently, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, her dark eyes wide, filled with a mixture of gratitude and lingering fear.
I thought I was done for,"
she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The rancher shook his head slowly, his gaze fixed on hers. "You're not. Not now. Not ever, as long as I'm here." Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she swallowed hard and nodded. Trust, he realized, was fragile. It could be built or broken in an instant, and in this moment he needed to make sure it stayed. He offered her his hand again, not just for support but as a symbol of safety, a promise. She took it tentatively, gripping tightly, as if holding on to more than just his hand, perhaps to the hope that she could survive. The cold wind swept over them, carrying the faint scent of pine and snow, reminding them both of how small they were against the forces of nature. Yet, despite that, they had managed to survive. The rancher felt a strange mix of pride and relief, but also a deep sense of responsibility. He had saved her, yes, but he also knew that the danger was far from over. The ice, the river, the winter, all of it was unpredictable, and he couldn't afford to let his guard down. "Can you walk?" he asked softly. She nodded, though her movements were slow and hesitant. Every step seemed measured, deliberate, as if she feared the earth itself might betray her. The rancher fell into step beside her, keeping a careful eye on her footing. "Take it slow. Don't rush. We'll get somewhere safe before the sun rises fully," he advised, his tone calm but firm. As they moved through the snow, the rancher noticed the faint trail of footprints leading away from the river. He realized they were the only two humans in this vast, frozen landscape, and the isolation pressed heavily on him. The silence was broken only by the crunch of snow beneath their boots and the distant call of a bird. He could sense the tension in the woman's body, the way she kept glancing at the river, as if expecting it to reach for her again. "You're brave," he said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "Not many would have stayed calm as you did." She looked at him, surprised, her eyes searching his face. "Brave?" she repeated softly, almost in disbelief. "I was scared, terrified." He nodded. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what you must anyway. You held on. You didn't give up." Her lips curved slightly, a faint smile breaking through the tension. It was fleeting but genuine, and the rancher felt a small warmth spread through his chest. There was something about her resilience, something unyielding and strong, that drew him in. He realized that this was not just about survival. It was about human spirit, about the courage to face fear and push forward despite it. They walked in silence for a while, the snow stretching endlessly around them. The rancher's mind wandered back to the river, to the sound of the ice cracking, to the way her hands had gripped his. Every detail was etched in his memory. He felt a quiet awe at how close they had come to disaster, and a deep respect for the woman's strength. She was more than a survivor. She was a fighter, someone who faced danger head-on. Suddenly she stopped, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We should find shelter," she said firmly. "The wind is getting stronger, and the snow will make it harder to see if we keep moving." He nodded in agreement, scanning the area for any signs of a safe place. A small cluster of trees appeared a short distance away, their branches heavy with snow, forming a natural barrier against the wind. It wasn't much, but it would provide some protection until they could figure out their next move. As they approached the trees, the rancher noticed something in her expression, a mix of caution and determination. She had survived the ice, and now she was assessing the next challenge, just as he was. He admired that. Most people would have panicked, but she was already thinking ahead. "We'll rest here for a moment," he suggested. "Catch our breath. Warm up a little." She nodded, settling onto a snow-covered patch as he did the same. The cold was relentless, seeping into their bones despite the layers of clothing. He pulled a small blanket from his pack, offering it to her. She hesitated for a moment before accepting it, draping it around her shoulders. The gesture was simple, yet it carried a sense of care and reassurance. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice softer now, more composed. The rancher studied her quietly. She had dark hair, tied back neatly, and eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom. Her features were strong yet gentle, a reflection of both resilience and grace. He wondered about her life before this moment, about the paths that had led her to this frozen river. There was a story there, one he could sense but did not yet know. "You're quiet," she said suddenly, breaking his thoughts. "Do you always watch strangers like this?" He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, not strangers. I've learned to notice things. Danger, beauty, people. You never know which will matter more in a moment like this." She nodded thoughtfully, her gaze distant. "I've learned that too," she admitted. "The land teaches you. It teaches you to watch, to listen, to respect what you cannot control." Her words resonated with him. He knew that lesson well. The rancher had spent decades learning from the land, understanding its moods and patterns, respecting its power. But even with all his experience, the river had tested him in ways he had not expected. And yet, here they were, alive, learning together from a moment of shared danger. They sat in silence again, the snow falling gently around them. The world seemed to slow, the wind softened, and for the first time since the river, there was a sense of calm. The rancher could feel the tension in his body easing, though the adrenaline still lingered. He glanced at her, noticing the way she wrapped the blanket around herself, how she drew in deep, steady breaths. She was alive, yes, but also thoughtful, reflective, as if processing everything that had just happened. "Do you always face danger like that?" he asked cautiously, curious about her past experiences. She smiled faintly, a shadow of humor in her expression. "Not always," she replied, "but sometimes you have no choice. You adapt, or you don't survive. Life doesn't wait for fear to pass." He nodded, impressed by her wisdom. "I've learned the same thing," he said quietly. "Fear is natural, but action is necessary." The wind picked up again, stronger this time, reminding them both that they could not linger forever. They would have to keep moving to find proper shelter, but for now, they allowed themselves a brief moment of rest. The rancher stood, brushing snow from his coat. "Ready to move?" he asked. She nodded, standing as well, her movements more confident now, her fear replaced with resolve. Together, they stepped out from the shelter of the trees, moving carefully across the snow. The river was behind them now, but the memory of its danger lingered. The rancher could feel the connection between them strengthening, forged in the crucible of survival. There was trust now, mutual and unspoken, a bond that neither time nor circumstance could break easily. As they walked, the rancher kept talking, guiding her through the terrain, pointing out weak spots in the snow, areas where the ice might be thinner than it appeared. She followed his lead, grateful for his guidance, but also showing her own knowledge of the land. It was a delicate balance of leadership and cooperation, each respecting the other's strengths. Hours passed, the snow continuing to fall in soft, silent layers. The landscape was harsh but beautiful, and the rancher could feel a sense of admiration growing for the woman beside him. She had faced fear, embraced trust, and survived a moment that would have broken many others. And now, walking together, they moved not just to survive, but to understand each other, to share a moment of connection that went beyond words. Finally, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow, they spotted a small cabin in the distance. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth and safety. Relief washed over them both, silent but powerful. The rancher felt the tension ease, though he knew the day was far from over. There would be time to rest, to recover, to reflect on what had happened. But for now, they had survived together. The woman glanced at him, her eyes reflecting both exhaustion and gratitude. "Thank you," she said again, softly but sincerely. He nodded, meeting her gaze. "You don't have to thank me. We made it because we trusted each other. That's enough." She smiled faintly, a flicker of warmth in the cold winter evening. And together they continued toward the cabin, each step a testament to courage, trust, and the quiet strength of the human spirit. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the snow in shades of gold and orange, but the air had grown colder, sharper. Every breath the rancher took felt like frost sliding down his throat, and he could see the woman beside him shivering slightly, despite the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. They were not far from the small cabin they had spotted earlier, but the snow-covered ground was uneven, dotted with hidden ice patches and slippery slopes. Every step required careful attention, and neither could afford to rush. "Watch your step here," the rancher warned gently, extending his hand toward her. She took it, gripping tightly, the warmth of his palm a small comfort against the icy wind. She had grown more confident since the river incident, but the memory of it lingered like a shadow. She moved slowly, feeling the uneven snow beneath her boots, trusting him to guide her. There was an unspoken agreement now. He led, she followed, but both were equally committed to survival. As they moved forward, the rancher noticed a faint sound, almost drowned by the wind, the distant groan of the river, perhaps, or ice shifting under hidden snow. His heart tightened. Even on solid ground, the environment was not entirely safe. He scanned the surroundings carefully, eyes trained to catch every movement, every subtle sound. The woman noticed his alertness and followed his lead instinctively, mirroring his caution. She had survived so far, but she knew the danger had not ended. "Are you cold?" he asked quietly, glancing at her. She shook her head, but the slight tremble in her hands betrayed her. He tightened the blanket around her shoulders, adjusting it carefully. "We'll be at the cabin soon." "Just a little further," he said. His voice was calm, steady, an anchor in the harsh wilderness. She nodded, drawing in a deep, steadying breath, pushing the fear and discomfort to the back of her mind. Suddenly, the snow beneath her foot shifted slightly, a small crack forming. She froze instantly, her eyes wide with panic, and the rancher's heart leapt. "Careful," he said firmly, placing his hand on her arm. "Take it slow. Trust your steps, not the snow." She swallowed, nodding, and continued, her movements careful, deliberate. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way every muscle was alert, ready for the unexpected. She was exhausted, but she refused to give in to fear. The path was narrow, bordered by frozen shrubs and small trees. The wind whistled through the branches, making them sway dangerously close to the pair. At one point, a loose branch snapped under the weight of snow, startling the woman and causing her to stumble. The rancher was immediately there, catching her with a firm grip. "Steady," he said, his voice gentle but commanding. She looked up at him, relief flooding her expression. "Thank you," she whispered, gripping his hand as if it were a lifeline. They continued on, the sun lowering further, the shadows stretching long across the snow. Each step was heavy with fatigue, but neither spoke of it. Words were unnecessary. The silence between them was filled with understanding, with the shared knowledge that they were surviving together. He glanced at her occasionally, noting the determination in her eyes, the way she kept moving despite exhaustion. She was more than a survivor. She was brave, resilient, and unyielding. Suddenly, the snow beneath the rancher shifted as well. He froze, feeling the subtle give of thin ice hidden under a fresh layer of snow. His heart raced. He had seen enough to know that a single misstep could plunge them into freezing water. He shifted his weight carefully, testing each step before moving forward. "Stay close," he called softly. "Don't take any risks. Let me guide you." She moved closer, holding onto his arm, her trust absolute. As they pressed on, the wind intensified, blowing sharp flakes into their faces, stinging their eyes and cheeks. The rancher adjusted his coat, shielding her as best as he could while maintaining his own balance. He knew that the river was not far off, and one wrong step could send them both into the icy current. His mind raced with possibilities, calculating every move, every step that would keep them safe. "Almost there," he whispered, though they had no visible sign of the cabin yet. The woman's breath came in visible puffs, small clouds in the frigid air. She had survived the ice, yes, but the journey here had been exhausting. The rancher felt a deep admiration for her courage, for the way she had faced fear without yielding. He realized that this was more than just survival. It was a test of trust, of connection forged in the most extreme conditions. Then, without warning, a hidden patch of ice gave way under the woman's foot. She let out a startled cry as she began to slip toward a narrow, frozen stream cutting through the snow. The rancher acted instantly, lunging forward, grabbing her arm with a firm, steady grip. "Hold on!" he shouted, planting his feet to brace against the slippery surface. She clutched him tightly, her fear palpable, and he could feel the ice trembling under their combined weight. They struggled for a moment, each movement careful, deliberate. He could see the panic in her eyes, the sharp intake of her breath, and he focused on keeping her calm. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "Breathe. Trust me. We're going to get through this." She nodded, swallowing hard, and tightened her grip. He shifted his weight slowly, guiding her to the firmer snow along the edge of the stream. Step by step, they moved together, until at last she was safe. The rancher exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain from his body. She sank to her knees on the snow, exhausted but unharmed. He knelt beside her, checking her carefully. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded, her face pale but determined. "Yes, thanks to you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. He shook his head, smiling faintly. "You did most of the work. You held on. That's what matters." For a few moments they simply rested, the snow falling softly around them, the wind carrying the distant sound of the river. The rancher could feel his own body aching from the effort, but the relief of seeing her safe was stronger than any fatigue. He glanced at her, noticing the way her dark eyes held a mixture of exhaustion, gratitude, and something deeper. Respect, perhaps, for the bond they had forged in these dangerous moments. "We need to keep moving," he said finally, helping her to her feet. "The cabin is still a little way off, and we need light before it gets dark." She nodded, standing carefully, leaning slightly on him as they resumed their slow trek. Every step was cautious, deliberate, but they moved forward with purpose. He kept an arm close to her, guiding, supporting, ensuring that each step was safe. The snow grew deeper now, reaching nearly to their knees in some places. They struggled through it, the cold biting through their gloves and coats. Yet neither spoke of complaint. Words were unnecessary. Their focus was on survival, on maintaining the trust and connection that had become so vital. How? He felt a growing respect for her resilience, for the way she faced fear head-on, never giving in, never panicking. After what felt like hours, the first outline of the cabin became visible through the falling snow. Smoke curled from the chimney, a promise of warmth and safety. Relief washed over both of them. The rancher quickened his pace slightly, leading her toward the small shelter, each step measured to avoid the hidden ice. She followed, her trust unwavering, her exhaustion forgotten in the anticipation of safety. As they reached the cabin, the rancher opened the door and stepped inside, helping her over the threshold. The warmth hit immediately, a sharp contrast to the freezing wind outside. She sank onto a chair near the fireplace, her breath finally slowing as her body absorbed the heat. He knelt to remove her boots, careful to keep her feet from further chill. "You're safe now," he said gently, the words carrying more weight than any gesture. She looked up at him, her dark eyes meeting his. I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. He shook his head, smiling. "You don't need to. You survived. That's all that matters." "That's enough." She smiled faintly, exhaustion and relief mingling on her face. The rancher noticed the subtle way her shoulders relaxed, the tension easing as the warmth of the cabin seeped into her bones. For a while they simply sat there, the fire crackling softly, the snow continuing to fall outside. Words were few, but the silence was filled with understanding, with the quiet bond that had formed between them. The rancher felt a deep sense of admiration for her courage, for the way she had faced danger without surrendering to fear. She, in turn, seemed to recognize his strength. His calm presence and the trust between them deepened. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady now. You saved my life today." He nodded. "We saved each other," he replied. She looked at him, a hint of surprise in her expression. "How do you mean?" she asked. He smiled faintly, meeting her gaze. "Because trust, courage, and patience, those are what kept us alive. You held on. I guided. Together, we survived. That's what matters." She nodded slowly, the meaning settling in. The rancher felt a sense of pride, not in himself, but in the connection they had forged, and the courage they had both shown. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside the cabin, warmth and safety enveloped them. The danger of the river and the ice was behind them. The cabin was small but warm, the fire crackling in the hearth and casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls. The rancher took a deep breath, letting the heat chase away the icy chill that had settled in his bones since that morning. The Apache woman sat near the fire, her hands wrapped around a mug of steaming tea he had prepared, trying to shake off the last remnants of cold. They both remained quiet, each lost in thought, each replaying the morning's events. The river, the ice, the desperate grip of hands, it all felt surreal now, like a memory of a world that had almost been lost. He watched her, noticing the subtle signs of fatigue in her posture, the way her shoulders drooped slightly, and yet, despite the exhaustion, there was a spark in her eyes, a quiet determination that had carried her through the morning's ordeal. He realized that survival was never just about physical strength. It was about courage, resilience, and trust. And today, they had both demonstrated all three. "You should rest," he said gently, breaking the silence. "You've been through a lot, and your body needs it." She shook her head faintly, a small smile on her lips. "I will soon," she replied, "but I need a moment to make sense of everything." He nodded, understanding. Sometimes the mind needed to catch up with the body. especially after a moment so close to disaster. The fire crackled softly, filling the cabin with warmth and a quiet sense of safety. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in a blanket of white, but inside there was a fragile peace. The rancher sat across from her, keeping a watchful eye while also giving her space. He could feel the weight of what had happened pressing down on both of them. The river had tested their limits, forced them to confront fear head-on, and yet they had survived. Together. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there, she said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and awe. He shook his head, smiling faintly. You would have found a way, he replied. You're stronger than you think. But yes, I'm glad I was there too. It's better when we face danger together. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and curiosity. Together, she repeated, almost as if savoring the word. The rancher nodded. Together, he confirmed. He realized that these two simple words carried more meaning than anything else could. They symbolized trust, teamwork, and mutual respect, the very things that had saved her life that morning. She had held on to him when the ice threatened to give way, and he had guided her to safety. That trust was now a bond unspoken yet undeniable, linking them in a way that could not be broken by time or distance. The woman sipped her tea, the warmth spreading through her hands and into her body. She glanced at the rancher, noticing the tension in his jaw, the fatigue in his posture. You should rest too, she said softly. You've done more than enough for one day. He shook his head, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I'm fine, he said, but I'll rest soon. First, I wanted to make sure you're completely safe. Her eyes softened at his words, and she nodded. The firelight danced across her face, highlighting the strength and courage that had carried her through the morning. I'm safe, she said, her voice steady now. Thanks to you. He shook his head again. No, thanks to both of us. You held on. That's what mattered. That's what saved us. For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the fire and the wind outside. The world beyond the cabin seemed distant, almost unreal compared to the intensity of the morning. The rancher could feel the tension in his body slowly easing, the adrenaline fading, replaced by a quiet sense of relief and accomplishment. He glanced at the woman again, noticing the subtle changes in her expression, relief, gratitude, and a faint sense of pride. You know, he began softly, most people would have panicked in a moment like that. But you stayed calm. You trusted me, even when it was dangerous. That's rare. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting both surprise and humility. I didn't have a choice, she admitted. The river, the ice. I had to trust someone, and I chose to trust you. His heart stirred at her words. Trust, he realized, was the foundation of everything. They had built it in the most extreme conditions, and it would last beyond this day. The snow outside began to soften, turning into a gentle flurry that dusted the cabin windows. The rancher and the woman continued to sit near the fire, letting the warmth seep into their bones. The fear of the morning had faded, replaced by a quiet appreciation for life, for survival, and for the unexpected connection that had formed between them. It was rare to find someone who could face danger with such courage and composure, and he felt grateful to have shared that moment with her. You've changed my perspective, she said quietly, breaking the silence. Before today, I thought I was careful enough, prepared enough, but now I see that courage and trust are just as important as skill. He nodded slowly. Exactly. You can be strong and careful, but without trust, without someone to rely on, strength alone isn't enough. Today proved that. Her eyes met his, and for a moment neither spoke. The firelight reflected in her gaze, creating a connection that words could not capture. They had faced fear, embraced trust, and survived a situation that could have ended in tragedy. And now, in the quiet warmth of the cabin, that shared experience had become something deeper, a bond forged in the crucible of life and danger. Hours passed, the snow continuing to fall outside, creating a soft white blanket over the world. The rancher and the woman remained near the fire, sharing stories of their past, speaking quietly of life, lessons, and survival. Laughter occasionally punctuated the conversation, lightening the heavy memories of the morning. In each word they found common ground, understanding, and a sense of connection that went beyond the immediate danger they had faced. Eventually, night fully settled in, the cabin glowing warmly against the cold darkness outside. The woman yawned softly, her body finally succumbing to exhaustion. The rancher stood and offered his hand, helping her to a small bed in the corner of the cabin. "Get some rest," he said gently. "You've earned it." She nodded, grateful, and climbed under the blankets, finally allowing herself to relax completely. The fire cast long, gentle shadows across the room as she closed her eyes, the warmth of the cabin providing comfort she had not felt since the river. The rancher sat nearby, keeping a quiet vigil, reflecting on the day's events. He thought about the fragility of life, about how quickly circumstances could change, and how moments of courage and trust could alter the course of events entirely. The river, the ice, the desperate grip of hands, they were all etched in his memory, reminders of what had happened and what they had survived together. As the night deepened, he felt a quiet sense of peace. The danger was over, the woman was safe, and they had both grown stronger for it. He realized that life often demanded more than preparation or skill. It demanded courage, trust, and the willingness to act when every instinct told you to hesitate. Today they had acted, and they had survived, together. Morning came slowly, the sun rising over the snow-covered landscape, casting a warm glow over the cabin. The woman stirred, stretching slightly, and the rancher offered a small smile. "Morning," he said softly. "Sleep well." She nodded, smiling faintly. "Yes, better than I expected," she replied. They both knew that the events of the previous day would stay with them forever, the fear, the trust, the bond they had formed. But now, with the sun rising, there was a sense of hope, of new beginnings, and of life moving forward. The fire still crackled in the hearth, and as they prepared to leave the cabin, the rancher offered his hand once more. She took it, gripping it firmly, a gesture that spoke volumes. They had faced danger, survived, and built trust in a single intense day. That connection was now a part of them, a quiet bond that neither time nor circumstance could easily break. As they stepped out into the crisp morning air, the rancher glanced at the river in the distance. The ice still gleamed under the rising sun, a reminder of what had almost been lost. But now the fear had passed, replaced by a quiet appreciation for life, courage, and the power of human connection. The woman walked beside him, strong, resilient, and grateful, and together they continued onward, forever changed by a day that had begun with danger and ended with trust, survival, and understanding. The river, the ice, the snow, they were all still there, beautiful and dangerous, a reflection of life itself. But the rancher and the woman had faced it together, and that made all the difference. They had survived, they had trusted, and they had connected in a way that would last far beyond the frozen winter morning. And as they disappeared into the snow-covered landscape, their footsteps side by side, the world seemed a little less cold, a little less unforgiving, and a little brighter because of the courage and trust they had shared.